This is Friday, December 5th, 2025. We are in Natick, Massachusetts, and this tape is part of the Morse Institute Library's continuing Veterans Oral History Project. My name is Maureen Sullivan, and we are privileged to have with us today Jeff Alderson. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Maureen.
May I ask when you were born?
October 3rd, 1976.
And where were you born?
In Hutchinson, Minnesota.
What community do you currently live in?
Right here in Natick, Massachusetts.
Marital status?
Married.
And do you have children?
No children.
Now, I understand that you were in Minnesota only for about 6 months.
Yeah, my mom was divorced, moved with me to Maine. I grew up in Oakland, Maine, right near Waterville, where Colby College is, if you know the area.
And what was that like?
Kind of a rural community, small town. I was only in a graduating class of high school of 165 people. Everyone sort of knew your business. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any other family members who served in the military?
I had several family members that served enlisted. I have first cousins who were in the Army. My stepbrother ended up joining the Army. My uncle was, I believe, Air Force, but I was the first officer in the family.
All righty. And when and where did you enter the military?
I entered through ROTC by going to college first. I had an Air Force scholarship, and that was the only way I was able to afford college is to put some time into the service.
And where were you enrolled?
Worcester Polytechnical Institute, Worcester, Massachusetts.
WPI.
WPI, yeah.
Okay. What was your major?
Electrical and computer engineering. I also minored in music, so I had quite a breadth of things I did when I was in college.
And did you join right after graduation?
Oh yes, graduated in May. I reported to duty in July, and between May and July, I had to get a car, get a driver's license, and then drive across the country to my first assignment.
Good heavens! And well, what year was that?
That was in 1998.
1998. So, post-Persian Gulf, kind of post-Kosovo.
Well, Kosovo was interesting. My first actual assignment was during the air war in Kosovo. I was temporarily assigned to the Pentagon to do the night shift in the intelligence center, and I put together PowerPoint presentations for the Joint Chiefs. So it was quite the experience. And that was during the Kosovo air war.
Okay. So. Let's get back to the start of your military career. So you got your driver's license, you drove cross country. Where did you land?
I ended up going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. My first assignment was at the National Air Intelligence Center. I think these days it's called the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. Big building with no windows.
And was intelligence your first choice, or did the Air Force choose it for you?
So that's interesting. When you're in ROTC, you have an idea of what specialty codes you're going to go into. For the longest time, I thought I was going to be a pilot. In fact, I went through all the training and everything around being pilot qualified, but then I didn't quite know how long I wanted to stay in the service, and I didn't want to commit that long. So at the suggestion of the Commandant of Cadets at the time, when I was at WPI, he said, you might want to look at either intelligence or acquisitions. And it turns out my specialty code was in acquisitions for computer engineering, but I had a big focus in intelligence. And so my first assignment required a clearance, and I was working on computer systems, but with an intelligence spin. And that carried throughout my whole career.
Okay. And you've already discussed your first assignment.
Yeah.
Now at the time you were
second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right out of the gate, and I was only 21 years old, I think, at the time, second lieutenant. And while I was waiting for a lot of clearance things to go through, they said, hey, we've got something that you might want to do just to kickstart your career. And I spent 3 months in D.C. So I had a TDY to D.C. Almost as soon as I got to Ohio, they said turn around and go to D.C. And so I was there at the Pentagon for about 3 months.
Okay, and what happened after that?
After that, I came back to Wright-Patterson and got more involved in my first job, which was, I think I wrote down, electronic warfare database manager. Fancy way of saying that I managed the database that described anything that would emit signals in the world, so that the Air Force knew what was emitting the signals. And it was sort of a desk job. Worked with a lot of people inside, for projects around databases and electronic warfare, things like that.
Okay. So you're kind of in a very interesting transitional period as the military gets more into software, computers in general. Any general comments about that?
Yeah, it was interesting. That was back when very large databases were coming up. The internet had just started, so the whole concept of there even being an internet was relatively new at the time. A lot of research and intelligence collection, we call it, open sources, moved from becoming from newspapers over to the internet sources. So it was a very interesting time for that. And then for my job, it was about acquiring very large scale computer systems. And my second job that I was in, as it just so happened while I was on 9/11, my second job was around building command and control centers, which were basically thousands of workstations for military members to fight war from a desktop computer. And that was a very different approach to war fighting. Big rooms with big data walls, big screens to synthesize information, and all the war fighters are sitting behind a desktop computer.
You just mentioned 9/11. Can you tell us your experiences?
Yeah, mine's very interesting, and I think I still have it in my files somewhere. On September 10th, the day before, I flew out on United Flight 75 from Boston to LA, and then on to Hawaii. I was at Hickam Air Force Base on 9/11, ironically at Pearl Harbor. Very weird, ironic juxtaposition given the timing. I was awoken to call from my wife at the time, kind of screaming and crying, saying, she thought I was dead. I'm like, what do you mean? She says, well, all I heard on the news was Flight United 75, crashing into the World Trade Center. I'm like, okay, what's going on? And so it was like the next day, that was the flight. And so everything shut down, the base shut down. It went to security levels that even as a visiting officer, I couldn't get on the base to do the job I was there to do. And it was sort of another officer I was there with me walking around like empty streets, random people on the streets crying and everything. And then the next day we were still there because there were no flights. There were no flights home. I was in Hawaii. Sounds like a beautiful place, but they turned our hotel into a operation center for people that would have been coming inbound that weren't arriving. And the next day, all the newspaper headlines were juxtapositions of pictures of Pearl Harbor on fire and the World Trade Center on fire, side by side, because that was the second time we had been attacked at that scale. And so it was a very surreal place to be in, to make that comparison. For me personally, what I knew what it meant was I was going to have to be going overseas to fight a war, even as an engineer that worked in computers, because the job I was doing at the time was building these things called air operation centers, where you basically would deploy to a field or a foreign location, set up the command center, and fight your war from this sort of portable command center. And sure enough, we knew we had to go retaliate, and so we had to build a command center in the middle of the desert somewhere. And so that was my job for basically the next 2 years, was fighting two separate wars, Operation Iraqi Freedom and then Operation Enduring Freedom, which was Afghanistan. So that sort of kick-started my last 2 years in the service.
Okay. So where were you stationed in the Middle East?
So I was actually stationed out of Hanscom Air Force Base and deployed from there. I was at the Electronic Systems Center. The name of the unit was the Air Operations Center Weapon System. So we would be building, like I said, the command and control computer systems that they would use to fight the war. And my first deployment was right after 9/11. We went to just outside of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a little base called Prince Sultan Air Base. I remember it still to this day. And it was a joint operation with multiple countries. and I was there for the better part of a year. And that was my first overseas assignment. Then came home and then did it again. And the second time we went out we changed operation location to fight a different war because our attention turned to Afghanistan. I went out and built the exact same command center out in Al Udeid Air Base, which is in Doha, Qatar. And my knowledge is it's still being used to this day.
So, a little more about your experiences in the Middle East.
Yeah.
First of all, was it hot enough for you?
Oh, yeah. So, but interestingly, it was because the two different times of year that I was there, it was really cold one trip and really hot another. It was sort of temperate in some of the places we were at. All I remember, though, is that how different it was. Everything was flat. So my perceptions of what a desert looked like were completely thrown out the window when I would see what that part of the Mideast desert looked like. Everything was flat. No concept of dunes. It was rocky, granular, very, very long horizons. You could drive for kilometers and not see anything. Yeah, it was hot. I learned how to drive a forklift because a lot of my equipment showed up in shipping containers, and I would have to sort of arrange them like Lego pieces to build, the server farm. And I was driving a heavy forklift. I think the ambient temperature got up to about 125 degrees Fahrenheit some days, and it was about a quarter-mile walk from where we worked to where we barracked. So it was quite an experience for that.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the barracks, were they pretty basic? Were they?
Yeah. So the first trip it was tents. Second, no, I have it the other way around. First trip actually, because we were working with the host country pretty closely, we had really nice living quarters. They felt sort of like individual apartments, concrete walls. It was very well done. But we were late to arrive. Other people that had got there before us still were living in tent. We called it tent city. So they were still living in tent life, even in the ambient temperature. And in Doha, Qatar, it was very similar. There was still a lot of tent city type living. Luckily, that's why everyone liked working in our environment, because we were building computer server farms, and those had wonderful air conditioning, and so no one minded volunteering for night shift to do work and testing with computer systems after hours, because you could beat the heat by being close to the computers. Mm-hmm. So.
And during this time when you were stationed in the Middle East, what was your rank?
By that time, I was captain.
You were captain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I was first lieutenant when 9/11 happened, but I pinned on captain in 2002, mm-hmm. right in the middle of all this. So I was mostly Captain Alderson through my whole mm-hmm. overseas time.
And conditions overall were at least satisfactory for you? Your food was okay?
Of all the things that were the best part about that trip, mm-hmm. it was the food. And there were some really weird, surreal experiences about the food. There's something about, how like smell, memory, and smells being familiar. They had like a portable Burger King that they flew in that was part of the base. I remember that distinctly, and the smell was like Burger King. Like it was like being outside of Burger King. Like everyone knew what it was, and it was pretty cheap. And then I remember on events and holidays, being there for certain holidays, like they would go out of their way for the meals, and like there was steaks like 2 or 3 nights a week, and then they would one week they flew out a whole team from Outback Steakhouse to like cater and like serve us meals. It was like their way of doing outreach. So food, I remember distinctly, was very good all the time. I never went hungry. Yeah.
So you never had to deal with the MREs?
Not since. The only time I ever really had to deal with MREs in the military was actually during ROTC, during training, mm-hmm. and during field training. I spent 2 weeks doing that, and I remember that one. I remember distinctly having to work on with MREs a lot.
So what happened after your second deployment?
Towards the end of the second deployment, I got to realize, given why we were there, politically why we were there, where we were going, not I want to say like generally as a country, but like mm-hmm. what our military was being asked to do now was a little different than what my expectations were when I joined the military. And I had a change of station probably coming up within a year. and I didn't know if I was going to go to like squadron officer school and like to go be a major in my next rank. I would need to do that. And before I invested in all that, I took some stock of what I wanted to do. There were a couple of other folks that I had gone through ROTC with that had already separated from the service and were on to their main careers, and they were talking about what they were working on, and I thought that was interesting. So I decided at that time to probably, leave the service, and I talked with the colonel that ran the Air Operations Center unit, and just said probably not a good fit for me anymore, and that was it. So I was only in the service. It's on the paper over there somewhere. 4 years, 11 months, and 20-something days. So I was like a day or two shy of 5 years on the nose.
So you separated from active service. Did you join the National Guard or reserves?
No, I didn't join the Guard or reserves. I went into working as a consultant for Oracle, keeping my security clearance, and so I still worked on government programs and things, and I was still sort of military adjacent. Actually leaning heavily on the skills from my first assignment in the military and my database work. But I didn't, I never joined the Guard or had that second income. Some other folks I knew had, but I never attached and did that.
And did you ever join any military service organizations such as the VFW?
I did for a while. When I moved to Natick, it was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. I joined AMVETS, Post 79 here in Natick, and was a member for a while, but let that lapse just a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Okay. And during your post-service time, did you ever take advantage of any of the government programs, such as the GI Bill or medical services?
Yeah, so I lucked out in a couple of ways. One, I actually used up my benefits a different way on the way in. Because I did ROTC, I had a scholarship through Air Force, and that paid for school up front.
Okay.
And so the GI Bill is usually for enlisted that would go back to school, but I had already used those benefits on the way in to become an officer. So I know I never used any education benefits afterwards. No, luckily I separated from the military. I had no service-connected disability or anything, so I didn't take advantage of any medical benefits or whatnot. Ironically, it wasn't until about 10 or 11 years ago that I started to realize, different companies and other things even offer veterans benefits. I never thought to take advantage of those things. I did notice when I started to apply for jobs later on that preferences were given to veterans in certain positions, and that I always check those boxes for what it's worth. And it was interesting when I was at a startup. This is a benefit that a lot of people don't know about. But when you have like a veteran-owned business, one of the jobs I did in my civilian career was at a startup, and we were able to check a box because I was a part owner of this company, and we were able to check the boxes saying this is a veteran-owned business because of my involvement in it.
Okay. Excuse me. So your active service ended just about 20 years ago.
Just about.
What have you been doing since then?
Oh gosh. So like I said, I went in as a consultant for Oracle, trying to use my government clearance, keep working on projects like that. That only lasted about 9 months. The travel was rough. And then I switched gears into, I applied on monster.com. That was a thing that was brand new back then. And I applied to join this company that was trying to do education and career planning. And I joined it because I had similar interests in, like, my own college path was weird, but I like advising people about that. And then there was a technology angle to it that I thought I had a good fit for, and sure enough I was. So I spent 10 years at this startup called Connect EDU, working on college and career planning, and I had almost every job title you can imagine, up through head of technology and head of product for this company. I got to meet and work with former Governor Jane Swift at that company. We worked together on some projects. And from then I started basically a 20-year career in education technology. I worked at a couple of other different startups that were either successful or went to Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Some of them got acquired, which was very nice for me. And then I ended up, most recently, I work at MathWorks. So I head up education products at MathWorks. So that's a big company right here in Natick, and I handle a pretty big responsibility there. But I've also been giving back more recently into local government, town government. So I got heavily involved when I moved to Natick about 10 years ago. I got involved. I ran unsuccessfully for school committee. I joined the school council for our middle school. I joined the board of the Natick Education Foundation for a few years. I was a town meeting member for 4 years, and then I ran, and this year was elected to be town moderator for the town of Natick. So I don't know, maybe that's the Boy Scout in me, but I've always wanted to have something that's given back to the local community.
Well, of course, being born and raised in Natick, I know how Natick town meetings can go sometimes.
Yeah.
How's it been for you?
It's good. It's funny. Like you talk about when you talk with other veterans and like transferable skills and like what it takes, like your bearing, your ability to like stay calm under pressure, make rational decisions, try to lead people in tough environments. A lot of that comes through in these sorts of town political things. So that's still a big deal. Being able to do public speaking, I think what I'll say about the Air Force is that they taught me, my first assignment was doing PowerPoint presentations for generals. So learning how to do public speaking and how to present yourself and like, sort of own your material and own your subject matter, like core part of who I am. And so it's been a natural fit for running a town meeting. But yeah, no, I like being plugged into the community. I like being, it was weird. It was like flipping a switch. I would go from no one knew who I was in Natick to now I walk down, like I go to like the coffee shop and everyone knows who I am and wants to talk about local politics. And I like that. I like being known as someone that can, be helpful to people that are in town.
Mm-hmm. So Jeff, how important has it been for you to serve in the military?
Pretty important. It gave me a worldly context that I would not have had otherwise. First, I don't think I would have even left the state of Maine if the military didn't pay for my education. Mm-hmm. I don't know what I would have done. I would have enlisted. In fact, when I was trying to enlist, I thought I was going to enlist because I had no money for it, and it was the military recruiter that gave me a scholarship application and said, "You need to go to college. Your ASVAB scores, as I said, were higher than they need to be. You should go to college." And so, without that motivation, I don't think I would have left the state of Maine and gotten some perspective. And the perspective during 9/11 was important. I could see both the value of what we were doing, but it also, because I was an engineer, because I was a problem solver and a critical thinker, maybe I was overthinking what the military was doing. So it gave me some perspective on world events and geopolitical things that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And yeah, just the core skill set that not just to be in the military, but also to be an officer and to be in leadership. I was 21, 22 years old, and I was leading a team of 30 people that were like twice my age. The opportunities were just so unbalanced for being so young. It prepared me so well for every other thing that I did in my life and my career. With the exception of maybe interpersonal skills and soft skills and learning those things, I've had to relearn how to talk to people because the military teaches you how to talk to people one way. That doesn't always work in a commercial setting.
Okay. And before I forget, can you mention some of the medals and/or commendations you received?
Yeah, I'm only 5 years in. I had a lot of the basics. I did get a couple of Air Force Commendation Medals for the projects and the work that I did. One at the Pentagon, another one for the work that I did at the Air Operations Center location. What's distinctive about being a computer engineer, Air Force, I actually have a joint commendation because of one of the units we were working on was a joint and also combined, so with other countries' militaries project, and it has a Valor Declaration on it. And so it's, that's only usually for warfighting units. And what's interesting is the Air Operations Center actually is a warfighting unit, even though we're a bunch of computer geeks. And so I think one of my commendations is for that. But I wasn't really in the military long enough to really do, accumulate a lot of that. But there were some that were very interesting for that. I think probably more important than the ribbons were, I even saw it on your desk, some of the coins that you get. I have some very interesting commander's coins from 3 and 4 star generals because, CENTCOM, the command, like the 4-star general that commands Central Command for the Army, I was working with him at his, that was his shop that I was setting up for him. And so it's very interesting to have met those people too.
Okay. Is there any one or two people that you met during your military career that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there were a couple of great mentors when I was in. The first was, my first boss at the National Air Intelligence Center, I think his name was Raymond Werner. He was a civilian and older gentleman, very, underspoken, soft-spoken, ran a great shop. He created all sorts of opportunities for me as a second lieutenant to, feel my way around in the new unit and get sort of set up with people. He created and trusted me to create a lot of opportunities for working on new projects that were, high value, a lot of collaboration with other 3-letter agencies. So he was a great person, great mentor. And then when I got to Hanscom Air Force Base, I imagine he was promoted since, but at the time he was Major Stuart Libby. He was my direct manager at the time at Hanscom, and he very similar. We had a very tight schedule with a lot to do. He delegated quite a bit my way and had a lot of trust in my ability to deliver on things, but was able to give me feedback and keep me on track when needed. And I'd also be remiss to say Colonel Kenneth Stafford, who actually was the professor of aerospace studies at Worcester Polytechnical Institute when I was a cadet. He was very influential in terms of just getting started, learning about the Air Force, learning about flight, the engineering principles of that. So much so that I think I went back. So he was my professor when I started as a freshman. He was the colonel that pinned me on for second lieutenant and swore me in. And then I went back to his retirement from WPI, and then he eventually went back to WPI to be a professor, and I went back to his retirement from WPI. So it was like I've been in touch with him more than probably anybody else in the military, and that he bookended my career. So.
Okay. Any other stories you'd like to share with us?
Always shake out your boots if you live in tents when you're in the desert. There is a thing called a camel spider, and if you don't have a strong stomach, I don't suggest you Google that or do an image search for that these days. It's basically, if you're a fan of the Alien movies, all I could say is it's about as big as what we would call a face hugger. And I'm going to hold my hands up. It's about this big and looks like that. So if this is the head, it has as many hands. And they like the warmth of the boots to cool the boots, depending on the temperature and outside. And they bite, and they're nasty, and you can get a bad infection from those things. And all I'll say is, make sure to shake your boots out because they do like to hide in there. And more often than not, you'd hear some screams from the tents when people would find these guys hanging out. So, that's one. The other thing I would say is, the age I was at when I was in the military in 2001 to 2002 was also the big boom for video gaming. And one of my favorite stories was, because I was 21 or 22, and a lot of people working for me were like 18 or 19, and they all would volunteer to work night shift because it was cool in the server farms inside the environment. And then we're sitting around saying, hey, Captain Alderson, how do you think we should test the network? I said, who here has an Xbox? And so we hooked up a bunch of Xboxes on the network and hooked them up to the big data screens with these 100-foot data walls. And so here I am with a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds. We're all playing Halo on Xboxes, testing these government networks. Called it testing, but it was a good team building sort of experience. A lot of fun.
Okay, Jeff, is there anything more you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I talk with this about a lot of people that are considering the military or college as an option, particularly these days with affordability for college and everything. If I'm talking with younger kids and I say, consider the military, you might not have thought about it, but consider it. Even if you don't spend your whole career doing it, both the trade-off of like what it can provide for resources and what it can do to set you on the right path and give you time to figure stuff out. I always make that recommendation. And say what you will about like where we are leadership-wise of the military and everything, it's still a good option for a lot of people.
Okay, and with that, Jeff Alderson, thank you so much for taking part in the Natick Veterans Oral History Project.
Thanks, Maureen.